The snow in Millennium Park didn't fall all at once. It drifted slowly, almost carefully, as if the city of Chicago had decided to soften itself for the evening. The being reflected rows of streetlights in warped silver curves, and the bare trees lining the park stood still, their branches etched sharply against the gray winter sky. Somewhere beyond the park, traffic moved steadily along Michigan Avenue, the sound dulled by distance and cold. Eleanor Whitmore sat alone on a stone bench near the skating rink, her posture straight, her legs crossed neatly at the ankles. She wore a dark navy wool coat tailored to fit her frame perfectly, the fabric thick enough to block the wind, but structured enough to announce discipline. A pair of black leather gloves covered her hands, folded together in her lap as if waiting for instruction. Beside her rested a slim gift box wrapped in matte white paper. No bow, just a single silver ribbon laid flat and precise. It had been handed to her less than an hour earlier in the lobby of a glass tower overlooking the river. Applause, handshakes, a congratulatory smile from the board chairman who had called her a rare force of vision. She had thanked them, nodded once, and left before the valet finished speaking. The watch inside the box was expensive. Eleanor knew that without opening it. She had approved the budget herself. She stared out at the ice rink where a handful of skaters moved cautiously, hands linked, laughter rising and falling like something practiced. A young couple stumbled together and recovered, clinging to each other, breathless and proud. Eleanor watched without envy, just distance. The cold pressed through the bench and into her back. Sharp enough to register, not sharp enough to complain about. She welcomed it. Cold was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything else. Her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. She ignored it, for most of her adult life. Eleanor had been very good at ignoring things. She had learned early that attention was a currency best spent carefully, that waiting for someone to notice you was a risk, that if you wanted stability, you built it yourself and asked nothing of anyone. Those lessons had served her well. They had taken her from a cramped childhood apartment on the South Side to corner offices, keynote stages, magazine covers. They had also brought her here, alone, on a bench, on Christmas Eve. A gust of wind carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor near the park entrance. Eleanor drew a breath and let it out slowly, her shoulders rising and falling just enough to keep herself grounded. She wasn't sad, she told herself. She was simply quiet. Footsteps crunched behind her. She didn't turn. Chicago parks were rarely empty, even in winter. People passed through with dogs, with coffee cups, with purpose. She kept her gaze fixed on the ice. Then she heard a child's voice. "Daddy, why is that lady by herself?" The words weren't whispered. They weren't cruel. They were simply curious, spoken with the unfiltered honesty only children seem to possess. Eleanor felt a brief, involuntary tightening in her chest. A man's voice followed, low and careful. "Sweetheart, we don't stare." "I'm not staring," the girl replied. "I'm just noticing." Eleanor closed her eyes for a half-second, then opened them again. Slowly she turned. A man stood a few feet away, holding a broom in one hand and a dustpan in the other. He wore a thick gray jacket with a Chicago Park District patch stitched onto the sleeve, the fabric worn soft at the elbows. His boots were scuffed, the laces replaced with mismatched ones that still held. A knit cap covered most of his dark hair, but his face was open, whether in the way of someone who spent long hours outside. Beside him stood a little girl, maybe 7, bundled in a puffy yellow coat that swallowed her small frame. A pink scarf was wrapped around her neck twice, the ends uneven. She clutched a small paper lunch bag to her chest, its bottom stained faintly with grease. The man looked apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said. "She's very observant." The girl slipped free of his hand before he could stop her. She walked toward Eleanor with careful determination, her boots leaving small half-moon prints in the snow. Eleanor straightened instinctively, unsure whether to speak or remain still. The girl stopped directly in front of her and tilted her head. "Don't cry, miss," she said. Eleanor blinked. "I'm not." "You don't have tears," the girl continued thoughtfully, "but your face looks like mine does when I miss my mom." The sentence landed with quiet precision. Before Eleanor could respond, the girl added, "You can borrow my dad if you want." "Borrow. Not keep. Not take. Borrow." The man hurried forward, his face flushing. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Eleanor said, surprised at herself at how steady her voice sounded. The man hesitated, then reached into the lunch bag. He pulled out a cookie wrapped in wax paper, still warm enough to fog slightly in the cold air. "She made me bring extras," he said, offering it awkwardly, "for whoever might need one." Eleanor looked at the cookie, then at his hand. His fingers were rough, nails trimmed short, skin cracked from winter work. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. "Thank you," she said. The girl beamed. "My dad's a janitor," she announced proudly. "He keeps places clean so people don't feel sad in them." The man laughed softly, embarrassed. "Come on, Lily." Lily waved enthusiastically. "Eat it. It helps." They walked away, the broom scraping lightly against the pavement as the man resumed his work. Eleanor remained seated. The cookie was warm through the paper. She unwrapped it slowly and took a bite. It tasted like butter and sugar, and something faintly burned at the edges. It tasted homemade, imperfect. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. The memory came without warning. She was 8 years old again, sitting on the edge of a plastic chair in a dim apartment hallway, while her mother finished a late shift cleaning offices downtown. Eleanor's feet didn't touch the floor. She swung them back and forth, counting the flickers of fluorescent lights overhead. The building smelled of lemon cleaner and stale coffee. She waited quietly. She always did. The memory didn't linger. It never did. It slipped back into place like a file returned to a cabinet, leaving behind only a dull awareness. Eleanor swallowed and took another bite. When she finally stood, the bench felt colder than before. The park lights flickered on fully as dusk deepened, illuminating the snow in pale gold. She tucked the empty wax paper into her coat pocket and picked up the unopened gift box. As she turned to leave, she glanced once more toward the path where the janitor and his daughter had disappeared. For reasons she couldn't yet name, she hoped she'd see them again. Eleanor didn't make it 2 blocks before she stopped walking. The wind off Lake Michigan sliced between the buildings and found every seam in her coat like it had been waiting for permission. She could have called her driver. She could have been inside her condo in 10 minutes, watching the city from 50 floors up with a glass of something expensive she didn't even like. Instead, she stood under a street lamp at the edge of the park, hand still inside her pocket where the wax paper sat folded, the faint warmth of the cookie lingering like an insult to her usual numbness. Borrow my dad. The phrase should have sounded ridiculous. It should have bounced off her like all the other things strangers said when they didn't know who she was. But it didn't. It had slipped under the ribs. She turned back. Millennium Park was quieter now. The skaters had thinned out, the rink lights throwing a bright rectangle onto the ice while the rest of the park faded into shadow and soft snow. Eleanor crossed the path again, moving slower than she had earlier, scanning the walkways the way she used to scan rooms, efficiently, almost clinically, except this time she wasn't looking for threats. She was looking for a broom. She found them near the southern end of the park, where the walkways met the planter beds and the decorative lights created a tunnel of warm glow. The man, still in his Park District jacket, was sweeping salt and slush into neat piles with quiet concentration. Lily trailed behind him, holding the dustpan like a loyal assistant, her mittened hands gripping it with the seriousness of a job that mattered. Eleanor stopped a few feet away, unsure how to approach without sounding like herself. Lily saw her first. Her face lit up instantly, like Eleanor was a friend arriving late rather than a stranger returning. "You came back," Lily announced. The man looked up quickly, surprise flickering across his features. He straightened, one hand tightening on the broom handle, as if he wasn't sure what kind of encounter this would become. Eleanor forced her voice to stay simple. "I didn't say goodbye." Lily nodded, as if that explained everything. "You're still sad a little," she said, studying Eleanor's face with unnerving accuracy. "But it's less." The man gave a small, apologetic smile. "She's very honest," he said. Then, as if remembering basic etiquette, he added, "I'm Marcus. Marcus Reed." "Eleanor," she replied. Marcus blinked once, like the name stirred something in the back of his mind, but he didn't lean into it. He didn't ask for a last name. He didn't tilt his head with recognition the way most people did when they connected dots. He simply nodded. Snow landed on Lily's hat and melted into tiny dark spots. She brushed at them, then frowned. "Daddy, she needs hot chocolate," she said, as if diagnosing a condition. Marcus laughed softly. "We're almost done here," he told her. Lily pointed toward the street. "There's a place," she said urgently. "The one with the big windows. They put marshmallows shaped like stars." Eleanor surprised herself by speaking before she could reconsider. "I could buy it," she said, the words coming out too quickly, too plainly. "For both of you, if you want." Marcus hesitated, the pause small but telling. Not suspicion, more like the reflex of someone who measured every extra thing before accepting it, because extra things often came with hidden strings. "We can't," he began. Lily cut in immediately, eyes wide. "Yes, we can. It's Christmas Eve." Marcus exhaled through a smile that wasn't entirely amused. He looked at Eleanor again, more carefully this time, as if searching for the part of her that might be performing. He didn't find it. "All right," he said finally, "but only if I can at least get you a coffee next time." Next time. The phrase landed softly, like it had been spoken without thinking. It pulled something forward in Eleanor, something that usually stayed buried under schedules and contracts. She nodded. "Deal." They walked together through the falling snow toward a cafe off Randolph Street, the kind of place that made a living out of warmth, golden light spilling onto the sidewalk, garlands framing the windows, the sound of quiet music floating out each time the door opened. Lily ran ahead, pushing the door with both hands, the bell above it chiming cheerfully. Heat wrapped around Eleanor's face the moment she stepped inside. The air smelled like cinnamon, espresso, and baked sugar. The floors were dark, with worn smooth by years of boots and strollers. A couple sat near the window, sharing a pastry, heads bent close. A college student typed on a laptop, earbuds in, shoulders hunched against nothing but stress. Lily claimed a small round table near a corner, radiator, like she owned stock in the place. Marcus shrugged off his jacket and folded it over the chair with care that suggested he treated every object as if it deserved respect. Eleanor sat across from him, placing her gloves neatly on the table beside her phone. She kept the gift box in her lap, hands resting over it protectively, without knowing why. Lily leaned forward on her elbows, chin in her palms, eyes bouncing between Eleanor and her father. "Tell her," she urged Marcus. "Tell me what?" Eleanor asked. Marcus cleared his throat, faint embarrassment creeping into his expression. "She's been campaigning," he admitted. "For you to be less sad," Lily said proudly. "It's my project." Eleanor's mouth twitched. "A project?" Lily nodded. "I'm good at projects." Marcus returned from the counter a moment later, carrying 3 cups, 2 hot chocolates, and a plain black coffee. He set Eleanor's cup in front of her first. The hot chocolate was topped with marshmallows shaped like uneven stars, just like Lily promised. The cup warmed Eleanor's fingers to the cardboard sleeve. She stared at it for a beat too long. As if it might disappear, she blinked. Marcus sat down with his coffee, wrapping both hands around it. "So," he said gently, not prying but inviting, "are you from Chicago?" Eleanor almost laughed. It would have been easy to say yes and let the conversation float safely on small talk. It would have been easy to avoid what Lily had named out loud in the snow. "I am," she said instead, "but I lived above it now." Marcus didn't ask what that meant. He simply nodded like it was a normal thing for someone to say. "I've lived here all my life," he said. "Mostly the South Side. Lily and I are in Bronzeville." Eleanor's attention sharpened. That was the neighborhood her memory had dragged her back to on the bench. Hallway lights, lemon cleaner, waiting. Lily sipped her hot chocolate loudly and sighed dramatically. "This is the best part of winter," she announced. "The drinks, not the cold." Marcus smiled at her. "You say that until January." Lily pointed her spoon at Eleanor. "You should come see our tree," she said suddenly. Marcus's head snapped toward his daughter. "Lily!" "What?" she demanded. "It's small, but we decorated it. And Miss Eleanor needs to see a tree that's not fancy." Eleanor's stomach tightened at the idea of stepping into someone else's life so quickly. Not because she didn't want to. Because wanting felt like stepping onto ice she didn't know could hold her. "That's very kind," she said carefully. Lily tilted her head. "You talk like grown-ups on TV," she said, unimpressed. "You don't have to talk like that here." Marcus's eyes flicked Eleanor's face, watching to see if she'd be offended. Eleanor wasn't. She felt relieved. She took a sip of the hot chocolate. It was too sweet, slightly overdone, and somehow perfect. "Do you always work on Christmas Eve?" Eleanor asked Marcus, surprising herself again. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Parks don't clean themselves," he said, then softened it with a small smile. "Plus, holiday crowds mean extra mess. The city looks pretty, but it takes a lot to keep it that way." Lily nodded solemnly. "My dad makes sure people don't slip and die," she declared. Marcus choked on a laugh. "Not exactly how I'd phrase it." Eleanor found herself laughing too, quietly, the sound almost unfamiliar. The people at the next table glanced over with brief curiosity, then returned to their own world. It had been a long time since Eleanor had laughed in a room where nobody cared who she was. Lily watched her face the way she had watched it outside. "There," she said softly. "That's better." Eleanor looked at her, something tender and sharp moving behind her ribs. "Why do you care?" she asked before she could stop herself. Lily blinked. "Because you were alone," she said simply, as if that were the only reason needed. Then, after a pause, she added in a smaller voice, "And sometimes people think if you're alone, you deserve it." The sentence shouldn't have come from a child. It carried the weight of things heard, absorbed, and quietly stored away. Marcus's expression tightened just for a moment, then smoothed again. His hand reached across the table and adjusted Lily's scarf without thinking, grounding her. Eleanor's throat tightened. The memory pressed at the edge of her mind again. Fluorescent lights, the smell of cleaning solution, the patience of waiting for someone who was working too hard to come quickly. She didn't let herself fall into it this time. She stayed with the present. Outside the cafe window, snow gathered on the ledges in soft piles. The city moved behind the glass, cars, footsteps, distant horns, life continuing. Inside, warmth settled into the space between three people who hadn't planned to meet and yet felt, for reasons none of them could explain, like they were supposed to. When they finally stood to leave, Lily bounced in place as Marcus put on his jacket. Miss Eleanor, she said, slipping her hand into Eleanor's glove as if it were natural. You don't have to sit on benches alone anymore. Eleanor's breath caught, not because the words were dramatic, because they were said like truth. Marcus glanced at Eleanor, his voice gentle. Thank you for the hot chocolate, he said, and for coming back. Eleanor nodded, unable to shape the right sentence. She didn't trust her voice. They stepped back into the cold, and Lily immediately started talking about lights and cookies, and the best ways to make a paper star stay on top of a tree. Marcus listened, answering with half smiles, his attention always on his daughter even when he looked away. Eleanor walked beside them, silent, feeling the strange discomfort of warmth returning to a place in her that had been cold for so long it had started to feel normal. And when they reached the corner where they would separate, Bronzeville one way, Michigan Avenue the other, Lily squeezed Eleanor's hand. See you again, Lily said, not asking, not hoping, stating. Eleanor looked down at the little girl with the star-shaped marshmallow smile and nodded once. Yes, she heard herself say. See you again. As she turned and walked toward her car, the unopened gift box felt lighter in her hand. For the first time that night, Eleanor noticed the Christmas lights on the trees. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like the city was celebrating without her. Eleanor didn't sleep much that night. She lay on her back in the dark of her high-rise bedroom, the city humming faintly below, lights blinking in disciplined patterns she'd helped design through zoning boards and development approvals. The glass walls reflected her outline back at her, still composed, difficult to read. The unopened watch box sat on the dresser, where she placed it earlier, perfectly aligned with the edge. Borrow my dad. She rolled onto her side, annoyed at herself for letting a child's words follow her home. She had been trained not to carry things like that. She had spent decades learning how to compartmentalize, how to set moments aside until they dulled into irrelevance. This one refused to dull. By morning, Chicago had turned sharp and clear, the snow polished into brightness by the sun. Eleanor moved through her day as usual. Meetings, calls, decisions made cleanly and without hesitation. But there was a thin crack beneath the surface, something that made her pause just a fraction longer before speaking, that pulled her attention away at odd moments. Around noon, her phone buzzed again. A text message this time. Marcus. Lily wanted to know if benches always make people sad. Marcus. I didn't know how to answer that. Eleanor stared at the screen longer than necessary. Eleanor. Sometimes benches just help people sit still long enough to notice things. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Marcus. She liked that answer. The simplicity of it struck her harder than any headline ever had. They met again 3 days later, not planned, not deliberate. Eleanor was walking to the lobby of Community Center on the near west side after a site visit when she heard Lily's voice echo off the walls. Daddy, it's her. Marcus was there with a cleaning cart, sleeves rolled up, a cloth tucked into his back pocket. He looked surprised but not uncomfortable, like someone who'd learned how to accept interruptions as part of life. Eleanor stopped without thinking. Lily ran up and hugged her around the waist, her coat smelling faintly of laundry soap and cold air. Eleanor stiffened for half a second, then relaxed, resting a gloved hand lightly on Lily's shoulder. You're early, Lily said. So are you, Eleanor replied. Marcus smiled. She insisted on coming with me today. School's out early. They talked while Marcus finished his rounds, Eleanor following at an uncharacteristically slow pace. Lily narrated everything. The names of the rooms, the purpose of machines, which floors were boring and which ones felt important. At one point, Marcus apologized. You don't have to stay. Eleanor shook her head. I want to. The word surprised both of them. Later, they sat on the steps outside the building, paper cups of coffee and cocoa warming their hands. Traffic passed in steady waves. The city moved around them, indifferent but alive. "You don't look like someone who sits still very often," Marcus said gently, not accusatory. Eleanor considered the observation. "I didn't used to," she said. "Then I learned how." Lily squinted at her. "Was it hard?" "Yes," Eleanor answered honestly. "And lonely?" Lily nodded as if that confirmed something she already suspected. The memory surfaced without warning. She was 10, standing in the hallway of an office building late at night, watching her mother push a mop bucket across the floor. The building was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Eleanor leaned against the wall. Homework finished hours ago. Coat folded neatly over her arm. "You can sit," her mother had said, tired but kind. "I'm okay," Eleanor had replied, already learning the language of self-sufficiency. She remembered the way the hallways stretched endlessly, the way waiting felt like a job in itself. The flashback loosened its grip as Lily tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Eleanor," Lily said softly, "you don't have to be okay all the time." Eleanor swallowed. Marcus watched her closely now, something thoughtful settling into his expression. He didn't ask questions. He didn't fill the silence. He simply sat with it, which somehow made it easier to breathe through. Over the next week, small routines formed without being named. A coffee after Marcus's shift. A walk to the park when Lily needed to burn energy. Eleanor found herself adjusting her schedule without resentment, without calculation. That unsettled her more than she liked. One evening, as they walked past a row of brownstones in Bronzeville, Eleanor slowed, looking up at the buildings. The neighborhood felt familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. "I grew up not far from here," she said suddenly. Marcus glanced at her. "Yeah." She nodded. "Different life. Same sidewalks." He smiled faintly. Sidewalks remember more than people think. That night, Eleanor stood in her condo kitchen staring at the watch box again. She opened it finally, lifting the watch out, its weight solid and precise in her palm. She set it back down and closed the lid. For the first time in her career, the symbol felt smaller than the moment. Across the city, Marcus sat at his kitchen table after Lily fell asleep, sorting through old paperwork. As he shifted a stack of folders, one thin envelope slid free. Inside was a photocopy of a maintenance request form from years ago. South Loop offices, late-night cleaning shift. Attached to it was a handwritten note from a supervisor praising an employee's consistency and reliability. The last name on the form caught his attention. Whitmore. He frowned, a sense of recognition stirring. The past had a way of circling quietly, he realized, not to punish, but to remind. Outside, snow fell again, light and unassuming, settling into the grooves of the city as if preparing the ground for something that hadn't yet decided to arrive. The article went live just after sunrise. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. The headline was careful, almost polite, the kind that sounded reasonable enough to share without guilt. It used words like questions, transparency, leadership culture. It never accused Eleanor directly, but it circled close enough to leave a shadow. By the time Eleanor arrived at her office overlooking the Chicago River, it had already been forwarded to her by 3 people. She read it once, standing near the window, her reflection faint against the glass. The city below moved the way it always did, bridges lifting, cars stacking patiently, pedestrians cutting diagonals across crosswalks with practiced urgency. Nothing looked different. Inside, something shifted. The article suggested that Whitmore Industries' recent community partnerships were strategically timed and selectively publicized, hinting at image management rather than sincerity. It mentioned the park renovation initiative, the after-school grants, the quiet sponsorships Eleanor had approved without press releases. It questioned motive. Eleanor set her phone down slowly. Motive had always been the easiest thing for people to doubt, especially when it came wrapped in power. Her assistant knocked lightly on the glass. "The board is asking if you've seen the piece." "I have," Eleanor replied evenly. "Schedule a call for this afternoon." She didn't sound angry. She sounded prepared. Across the city, Marcus was finishing his shift at a downtown office building when his supervisor stopped him near the supply closet. "Hey," the man said, casual but curious. "Your name came up." Marcus stiffened. "How so?" "There's some talk," the supervisor shrugged. "About the CEO you've been spending time with." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I'm not," he began, then stopped. He didn't know how to finish the sentence without sounding defensive. "I don't talk about her." The supervisor nodded. "I know. Just be careful. People like to connect dots." Marcus went home uneasy, the feeling settling into his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. Lily sensed it immediately. "You're thinking loud," she said from the couch, coloring book forgotten. Marcus sat beside her. "Sometimes grown-ups get worried about things they can't control," he said carefully. Lily frowned. "Like when people think things about you that aren't true?" He blinked. "Who said that?" She shrugged. "Kids talk. Parents talk. It goes down." Marcus smiled faintly despite himself. "You're not wrong." That evening, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, the city dark beyond the windows, as her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a colleague or board member. It was Marcus. She hesitated before answering. "Hey," he said, his voice steady but quieter than usual. "I just want to check in." "I saw the article," she replied. "If that's what this is about." Marcus exhaled. "I figured you had. I just want to make sure Lily didn't say anything to you that made things uncomfortable." Eleanor leaned against the counter. "She didn't. And even if she had, it wouldn't change anything." There was a pause on the line. "You don't owe us anything," Marcus said finally. "I don't want this to become complicated." Eleanor closed her eyes. Complicated had always been her default. Controlled, managed, safe. "This isn't a transaction," she said softly. "I know the difference." Marcus didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice carried something raw. People get hurt when they don't. After the call ended, Eleanor stood very still, the silence pressing in. The city lights reflected off the countertops, cold and distant. She thought of the hallway from her childhood again. Fluorescent lights, the smell of cleaner, the way waiting felt endless but necessary. She had learned then that being seen could be dangerous. That closeness invited judgment. She had built her life to avoid that risk. And yet, the next morning, the board call was efficient and restrained. Reassurances were given. Statements were drafted. Eleanor agreed to nothing she didn't believe in. Later that afternoon, she drove to Millennium Park without quite knowing why. The snow had been cleared from the paths, salt crunching underfoot. The bench was empty. She sat anyway. For a long moment, nothing happened. No revelations. No sudden clarity. Then she noticed a small, folded piece of paper tucked beneath the bench slat. She picked it up. Inside was a child's drawing. 3 stick figures standing under a lamppost, one tall, one shorter, one very small. Above them, a crooked star. On the back, written in uneven pencil letters, "For when benches feel heavy." Eleanor pressed the paper to her chest, her breath catching for the first time since the article had gone live. Whatever people thought, whatever they wrote, some things were already real, and that made the next choice far more dangerous. The call came just after midnight. Marcus woke to the sound of his phone vibrating against a wooden nightstand. The sharp buzz cutting through the quiet of the apartment. For a split second, he lay still, listening to Lily's soft breathing from the bedroom down the hall, grounding himself before reaching for the phone. A known number. He answered anyway. "Mr. Reed?" A woman's voice asked, professional and tense. "This is Officer Langley with the Chicago Police Department. Is Lily with you right now?" Marcus sat upright so fast the room tilted. "Yes," he said immediately. "She's asleep? What's wrong?" There was a pause, just long enough to stretch fear thin and sharp. "We received a call," Officer continued. "A report that a child matching your daughter's description was seen alone near Millennium Park earlier tonight." Marcus's chest tightened painfully. "That's not possible," he said. "She's been home all evening." Another pause. Paper shuffling. "We understand, but we need to verify. Sometimes reports are mistaken. Sometimes they aren't." Marcus was already out of bed, pulling on his jeans, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "I'm coming down to the station," he said. "Please don't," the officer replied quickly. "Just stay where you are. We're sending someone to confirm." The call ended. Marcus stood in the dark kitchen, hands braced against the counter, breathing carefully so he wouldn't wake Lily. The old fear rose fast and familiar, the kind that came from knowing how quickly people made assumptions, how easily stories travel when power and poverty share the same sentence. He walked to Lily's door and opened it slowly. The bed was empty. The blanket lay rumpled, her favorite stuffed bear tipped onto the floor. "Lily," he whispered. No answer. He moved faster now, checking the bathroom, the couch, the small balcony. The apartment felt suddenly enormous, every shadow threatening. Panic surged. He grabbed his coat, keys clattering to the floor, and ran down the stairs 2 at a time, shouting her name into the night. Across the city, Eleanor was still awake, sitting at the dining table with a folded drawing spread out in front of her. She hadn't turned on the television. She hadn't checked her phone. She had been staring at the crooked star, tracing it with her finger like it might tell her something if she listened long enough. Her phone rang. Marcus's name. She answered instantly. "She's gone," he said, the words breaking apart as soon as they left his mouth. "I can't find her. They said someone saw her near the park." Eleanor was already on her feet. "I'm on my way," she said, no hesitation, no questions. The drive felt endless and too short all at once. Snow blurred the streetlights into streaks of white and gold as Eleanor pushed through traffic, her grip tight on the steering wheel. Her mind raced, memories colliding, waiting rooms, missing faces, the terrible stillness of places where children were supposed to be safe. When she reached Millennium Park, police lights cut through the darkness, blue and red reflecting off the bean's curved surface. Officers moved deliberately across the paths, flashlights sweeping. And there, near the bench, sat a small figure. Lily was curled in on herself, knees tucked up, her yellow coat pulled tight, one mitten missing. Snow clung to her hat and eyelashes, melting slowly into her hair. "Lily," Marcus breathed, dropping to his knees in front of her. She looked up, her bottom lip trembling. "I didn't mean to scare you," she whispered. "I just wanted to check." "Check what?" Marcus asked, pulling her into his arms, wrapping his coat around her small frame. "The bench," she said quietly, glancing at the empty space beside her. "I wanted to see if someone was still waiting." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. A flash of memory surged. Eleanor at 9, sitting on cold concrete steps outside an office building, watching the street through a glass door, waiting because waiting felt safer than asking. Marcus held Lily tightly, his own breath shaking now. "I'm here," he said over and over. "I'm always here." Eleanor knelt beside them without thinking, her gloved hand resting gently on Lily's back. Lily leaned into her immediately, trusting without question. "You came," Lily murmured. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice unsteady. "Always." The officer stepped back quietly, the crisis diffusing as quickly as it had formed. No charges, no lectures, just relief and exhaustion settling in its wake. Back at the apartment, warmth returned slowly. Hot cocoa steamed on the table. Lily fell asleep on the couch wrapped in blankets, her breathing even and deep. Marcus stood by the window, staring out at the city, his shoulders finally slumping. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "This isn't what you signed up for." Eleanor shook her head. "This isn't a contract," she replied softly. "This is life." He turned to her then, eyes red, unguarded. "I'm scared," he admitted, "of what this costs you." Eleanor met his gaze. "I've been scared my whole life," she said. "This is the first time it feels worth it." They stood there in the quiet, the city breathing around them, the bench no longer a place of waiting but a return. Outside, snow fell gently, erasing tracks, leaving behind something fragile and real. The apartment changed slowly after that night, not in any way that could be measured or announced. The furniture stayed the same. The walls didn't move, but the air felt different, like a place that had learned how to hold breath without fear. Eleanor began arriving without an agenda, without checking her watch the moment she stepped inside. She learned where Marcus kept the extra mugs. She learned which floorboard creaked and how Lily always stepped over it on purpose, like it was a game only she knew the rules to. They didn't talk about the night at the park at first. They didn't need to. Lily resumed her routines as children do, resilient and observant. But every so often Eleanor would catch her glancing toward the door, toward the window, checking that the world was still intact. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the living room window, Lily sat on the floor surrounded by paper and markers, humming to herself. "What are you making?" Eleanor asked. "A map," Lily replied without looking up. "A map of what?" "Places where people wait," she said, "so they don't get lost." Eleanor felt the words settle into her chest gently, like something fragile being placed back where it belonged. The children's theater program opened quietly 2 weeks later in a modest auditorium on the near north side. There were no banners, no press releases, just folding chairs, paper snowflakes taped to the walls, and a stage built from painted plywood and faith. Eleanor sat in the third row beside Marcus, hands folded, posture composed, heart anything but. Lily stood center stage during the final scene, her voice steady and clear. "When it's dark," she said, pausing just long enough for silence to lean in, "you don't have to find your light alone. You can borrow someone else's until yours comes back." The room went still, not the awkward stillness of mistakes, but the kind that happens when something true finds the center of a room. Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't need to. Something inside her loosened anyway. Afterward, they walked through Millennium Park together. The bench stood where it always had, brushed clean of snow by passing feet and wind. Marcus sat first. Lily climbed up beside him, legs swinging. Eleanor joined them without hesitation. For a moment, none of them spoke. Ryan poured cocoa from a thermos Lily insisted on carrying everywhere now. The steam rose into the cold air, soft and familiar. "I used to think benches were for waiting," Eleanor said quietly. "Like if you stayed still long enough, something would eventually come." Marcus nodded. "I used to think waiting meant you didn't matter." Lily looked between them, then leaned back against Eleanor's side. "Waiting just means you're still here," she said. "That's all." Eleanor smiled and rested her hand lightly on Lily's shoulder. That winter passed gently. The article faded. The whispers found new targets. The city moved on the way cities always do, but some things stayed. 1 year later, the snow fell again in Millennium Park, just as soft, just as patient. This time, Eleanor didn't sit alone. She stood beside Marcus, Lily between them, her hand in each of theirs. She was taller now, her voice more certain, her laughter louder. Eleanor wore no gloves, her hand warm where it rested against Marcus's. They paused by the bench. "I don't feel afraid here any more," Eleanor said. Marcus smiled. "Neither do I." Lily squeezed their hands. "That's because no one's borrowing now," she said. "We're just together." Eleanor looked out at the city, at the lights, at the snow settling gently into familiar grooves. She thought of the hallway she once waited in, the fluorescent lights, the patience she had mistaken for her strength, and she understood something she hadn't before. The miracle hadn't been finding a family. The miracle had been choosing to stay when one appeared. They walked on, leaving the bench behind, not empty, not forgotten, just complete. And in the quiet of the falling snow, the city held them without asking for anything in return.